Joining us now is Barton, who's a research professor in global Islamic politics at Deakin University. Greg, really great to have you with us. So when you take a look at what's happened and where we go from here, you've talked about the kind of difficult and dangerous partnership with the people that are now in charge. Do you see this as a moment of opportunity or of enormous regional risk?
Look, I think, Heidi, it's a moment of great opportunity, and there's good reason for being cautiously optimistic. What happened with the various rebel groups coming together and aligning with HTS, the key former Al-Qaeda rebel group, is they decided this was the least evil by a long measure of all the options. Getting rid of the Assad regime, incredibly brutal, callous, incompetent regime, that was the main goal. For Syria to have a bright future, it needs to work as a federation that respects pluralism. So HTS has to be happy to play a significant role alongside the Syrian Democratic Forces in the northeastern third of Syria, alongside with the various forces, including the forces that moved into Damascus from the south, that are secular and not comfortable with at least the former Al-Qaeda jihadist ideology of HTS. That seems like a long stretch, but it's possible. And credit to the people of Syria who have been amazingly resilient and focused in getting this far. Just those scenes of people being released from prisons, sometimes after tens of years as political prisoners, is a great thing in itself. But yeah, the difficult days ahead.
There's been much sort of spoken already about the power vacuum that potentially gets left, right? Who do you think are going to be rushing in to try and have a stake in this? We know that there's probably enormous opportunity for Turkey at this point.
Yeah, I think we need to shift the focus back, Heidi, to the people of Syria. I mean, the power vacuum is being filled by the people of Syria who very bravely fought. The key is whether they can work alongside each other and respect each other in this sort of plural alliance. If they can do that, and if Turkey can resist the temptation to exercise too much control via HTS, and also resist the temptation to move too harshly against the SDF in the northeast, this is the group that defeated ISIS after all, and where there's still many tens of thousands of people with ISIS associations in camps and prisons. And if America can help stabilize that northeast, which is, of course, a question under the new administration coming in January, then perhaps things can hold together and then there won't be a vacuum. The vacuum occurs when you sort of pull a regime out and there's nothing to replace it. In Iraq, that led to insurgencies. It doesn't have to be that way in Syria.
Greg, talk us through what happened with Bashar al-Assad's regime, because when he first came into power in 2000, he was seen as a potential reformer for the region. What changed and what happens next to him? Because the last we heard was that he was in Russia.
Yeah, that's a really good question, Sherry. I suspect he's got a nice sixth-floor apartment with a wonderful balcony. I can't imagine he could rest comfortably in retirement in Russia because, you know, he's now seen as a loser and Russia disposes losers. Anyway, that aside, the key thing to understand is that when Bashar Al-Assad succeeded his father, surprisingly his brother had been killed, so he was the unlikely replacement. People said, well, this London-trained eye doctor, he seems moderate and mild. He still seems moderate and mild in his demeanor. But he very quickly aligned with the most brutal of the generals in the Assad regime and carried out and continued to carry out for decades really harsh crackdowns on dissidents. That continued after the Arab Spring began in 2011. He missed many opportunities through that first decade. And then since then, he's missed opportunities to reconcile. Even in the last few years, when it looked like the region was reaching out and trying to sort of move on and rehabilitate Assad, he refused to take the opportunities offered to him. And yeah, so this is a collapse that you know, like a bankruptcy, occurred very slowly at first over decades and then all at once.
How are we expecting Washington to deal with HTS, which is, of course, a terrorist designated as a terrorist organization?
Yeah, when you designate a group as a terrorist organization, it's double-edged. I mean, you can understand why you do it, but it cuts off channels of communication. It means you're out of the loop. You don't have those back channels, at least not as clearly and certainly not officially, and therefore you can misjudge things. The best hope is that HTS is genuinely broken, that Jolani, who's consolidated his leadership there since 2012, has genuinely broken with that former Al-Qaeda background and is committed to a plural, you know, federal Syria. America needs to be in the loop, in my opinion. America needs to play a significant role, not interventionist in terms of foreign affairs, proxy power stuff, but just being supportive and positive, beginning with the SDF in the Northeast, but also finding a way to work through with HTS an off-ramp to their terrorist designation, so that if they show good faith and if they, meet scrutiny, they can be rehabilitated, perhaps much in the way that happened in Ireland with the IRA.
We know that, of course, Russia has assets and military bases all over Syria. We know that the Islamic Republic is probably not likely to give up its interests without a fight. How messy does that part of the transition get, do you think? What should we be looking out for on that side?
Well, Iran, of course, is at a moment of weakness, and the real shock troops on the ground for the Assad regime were largely via Hezbollah with Iranian backing. That's out of the play for the time being, so that's positive. Hopefully the regime in Tehran does some introspection and decides now's the time to move beyond the so-called axis of resistance. It seems to have almost finished. For Russia, it's more difficult. They really value that Tartus Mediterranean port. There are still ships there, and then 60 k's to the north in Yemen, there's an air base, both very critical to the Russians. The big question is how much resources they want to put into trying to keep those bases. And for whatever HTS-led new government that comes in, will they do a deal with the Russians? In many ways, they'd be well advised not to, but also to allow some peaceful exit. But that's the big question to watch at the moment.